Hello, good afternoon. My name is Davide Stronati. I'm the chair of the working group on climate change and engineering at the World Federation of Engineering Organization. And as the name says, we're going to talk about engineering this afternoon here with you. So we are here with a distinguished panel, and we provided our submission together with Conservation International, with the Engineering Institute of Canada, and with the Resilience First. And the title of our session is going to be System Thinking for Holistic Climate Action, Nature-Driven Engineering, Policy and Finance Solutions. So the session is going to be split into two different halves. The first one, there's going to be the four speakers. They're going to give a 7-minute presentation. Keep your questions for the end. There's going to be time for some Q&A. And then there's going to be a panel, further 45 minutes, where more discussion is going on later on today. So, without further ado, I would pass the button, which is the clicker, to Michela. And Michela Chan, she's a representative of the young engineers and future leaders at WFEO. And she's going to talk about past 2080 carbon management standards in infrastructure assets.
Well, thanks, Davide. Yes, so as you mentioned, my name is Michela Chan and I come from the UK. I'm a member of the Institution of Civil Engineers in the UK and also a member of the World Federation of Engineering Organization's Young Engineers Future Leaders Working Group on Climate Action, which is a bit of a mouthful, so I'll just call it the WFEO group for the sake of all of you. I'm here to talk about PAS 2080, which is a carbon management standard and how that fits into systems thinking and the broader theme that we're here to talk about today. But first I want to give you an introduction to our group. So as I mentioned, I am from the UK. I'm a civil engineer working in the water sector. But our group is a diverse group of young people from across the world. It's from Canada, from South Africa, New Zealand, loads of other places. But yes, the picture on the screen is a picture of our core team. And we bridge across all sectors from structures to transport, water. And our whole goal is to enable young engineers to collaborate globally and meaningfully to contribute to climate action. And we do this through a number of work streams, including policy advocacy, policy development. We are creating media content. One of the things that we've been working on is the Engineering Change campaign with the International Coalition of Sustainable Infrastructure to increase the promotion of sustainable development principles in engineering work for young engineers. And yeah, very excited to share this case study on behalf of our group. So what is PAS 2080? PAS 2080 is a carbon management standard, as I said, and it's globally applicable and spans across the infrastructure sector, looking at the whole value chain from right at the beginning, from design to construction and then use. It's already a key reference document being used by the UK government in their construction playbook, and it has the potential to be scaled up for use all across the world. So that's why I'm keen to tell you about it today. It was developed by the Institution of Civil Engineers and the Green Construction Board, also based in the UK, with the British Standards Institution, and is available for free online, so I'll give you a link at the end. But it's built on several principles, which I will just run you through today. So the first principle is about integrated systems approach to the built environment. I guess a systems approach is an approach where we think about every part of the complex world that we live in and try to tackle it in a holistic way. I think the engineering sector in general has been very siloed previously. We work in the thing that we know how to do, and we don't really talk to people who do other things. And with a challenge as big as climate change and everything associated with that, we need to start talking to each other more. The second principle is the whole life view. So this recognizes that the thing that we need to do to solve this crisis is not just to keep doing business as usual. We shouldn't just be building more for the sake of building more for our economy and everything. So it also advocates for new ways of doing asset management, thinking about reuse of assets, like upgrades of assets and how to successfully and sustainably deal with end of life, as well as how to manage like operations and maintenance. Another thing that is key to the whole life view is also understanding that sometimes there is a no-build solution, and that is also okay. As engineers, I think we like to build things, but I think we need to redefine what being an engineer is. Thirdly, nature-based solutions, which I think some of my colleagues here will touch more on. But the standard recognizes the integral role that nature plays in the built environment, both for mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And for example, we see like more coastal systems being built for prevention of coastal erosion, and that helps to provide resilience to coastal communities as well as providing livelihoods, which also feeds into the whole life view and integrated approach. And finally, the last principle of collaboration, which, as I mentioned, I think is lacking in the industry. We need better ways of talking more and collaborating more and sharing best practices and lessons learned, because I've heard a lot from a lot of engineers and people in other sectors as well that a lot of the tools that we need to fix the climate we actually have already, and we have a lot of the knowledge, not just from like formal institutions, but also from indigenous peoples and local communities who know best how to steward the environment where they live. And so we need to break our silos and just talk more. So I want to challenge everyone today to change the way you think about climate action in the built environment. I think as professionals, we don't often call ourselves climate advocates or activists. I think when you say activist, you think of someone like Greta Thunberg, but I think we can all be activists in the way that we are now tackling climate action in our own jobs, and influencing other people to do the same. So I'll just ask you all to spend a minute thinking about what you're going to do now. And what I want you to do now is to scan these QR codes and download the revised PAS 2080, which you can read tonight in all your free time at COP, and yeah, learn more about the approach. And I've also included a link to find out more about our working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. I guess you are all scanning the screen now, and which is great. And the second speaker is Emily Pigeon, who is engineer and vice president of Ocean Science and Innovation at Conservation International.
Thank you very much. I think I can't have had a better lead-in than from our friends and in the youth of this industry. I think it's a very good reminder that we need to be thinking systemically and starting to look at new approaches. So what I'm going to talk today about is something that's not a new approach, but I think it's new to many engineers. And that's this idea of green-grey infrastructure for coastal resilience, but also more broadly for all engineering resilience and adaptation applications. So the idea behind this is understanding that nature provides infrastructure. Nature, whether it be salt marsh, especially along our coastlines, whether it be salt marsh, mangroves, oyster reefs, coral reefs, protect and provide numerous co-benefits for coastal communities, and coastal communities around the world have and still today depend on this infrastructure, this natural green infrastructure, to provide them with resilience and adaptation. And that there are some increasing estimates of what the actual value of this natural infrastructure is. We know that there's estimates that the US coral reefs provide almost $2 billion in flood protection benefits each year. Mangroves are now broadly understood, and have been much discussion here at the UNFCCC this year about the value of mangroves for protecting coastlines. And then similarly, salt marshes, where I live near San Francisco, salt marshes are a fundamental part of the infrastructure for flood control. So we also know that these ecosystems are some of the most vulnerable on Earth and are being lost and degraded at very increasing rates. We've lost over half the world's mangroves 3/4 of the world's oyster reefs, nearly 50% of tidal marshes, and coral reefs are in serious decline. So as we lose these ecosystems, we are losing infrastructure and coastal protection. And so this is where this concept of green-grey infrastructure comes into play. What is green-grey infrastructure? It's really just including green infrastructure very purposely and consciously into your engineering solutions. It's combining ecosystem restoration or conservation with more traditional engineering approaches to deliver coastal resilience, climate change adaptation, and with that, all the other benefits that we have with the ecosystems. That could be biodiversity, it could be fisheries and other natural resources for communities. And I'm just going to show you quickly a few nice examples of where this is already being implemented. Here's an example where you can see that mangrove restoration has been integrated with a groin and a seawall, and between them the design is such that it's protecting coastal communities. Here's another one looking at shrimp aquaculture, and this is being piloted at the moment in Indonesia and in Ecuador. Traditional shrimp aquaculture is very low productivity and removes all of the coastal mangroves and results in significant loss of water quality and biodiversity in the coastal ocean. If you combine intensification of the shrimp ponds or the aquaculture ponds with mangrove restoration, not only do you get more shrimp, you get higher quality shrimp, you get mangroves that restore biodiversity, increase the water quality, and provide coastal protection for those shrimp ponds. So again, it's really thinking about green infrastructure as infrastructure. And lastly, there's an example that is just started in Waikiki, right in the center of the main tourist area of Hawaii, where concrete restoration of reefs is being constructed as a coastal protection mechanism, but then at the same time is also going to be restoring the ecosystem, and with it natural growth of the coral reefs to expand that protective value. So in an effort to really introduce this idea of green-grey infrastructure, Conservation International launched the Green-Grey Community of Practice to encourage collaboration and advancement of this discipline, and to really work to fundamentally transform engineering and construction to design and build with nature, to create the next generation of climate resilient infrastructure, if you like. So we have over 180 member organisations and have produced a number of key products to support others in developing and implementing these approaches. And we, of course, are welcoming of people to come join the community of practice. And then lastly, and in the second panel, we'll have more of this particular example. We are working to design large-scale or broader regional-scale approaches for green-grey infrastructure along the coast. This one's on the North Brazil shelf, where a portfolio of projects that are well integrated is being designed to support funding and financing of these approaches and integrate it into the full infrastructure for coastal protection in this most vulnerable part of the world. So with that, I am hoping to bring nature into the portfolio of options that we engineers implement daily as we address the impacts of climate change along our coasts.
Thank you, Emily. I think it makes sense, green-grey, to integrate the green infrastructure into the grey and the grey with the green. It's also quite nicer and more attractive, more livable. And the next speaker is going to be Laleh Behjat from the University of Calgary, and she's going to talk about the transportation system and energy transitions.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm Laleh Behjat from the University of Calgary, and I'm also the chair for Women in Science and Engineering in the Prairie region of Canada. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge that in the spirit of reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples of Canada, I acknowledge that I work, live, and play in the traditional territories of the Indigenous people of Southern Alberta and the Métis Nation District 5 and 6. Now, a step towards reconciliation can be to acknowledge the land that we live on, but the real work starts when we start righting the wrongs of the past. So I'll first start with the nature-driven transportation solution, and I'll give you a few examples. The first one is we have used, as engineers, we have used the inspiration from a kingfisher bird beak to actually make these high-speed trains in Japan, which are much more aerodynamic than the trains that were made before. Another example is this snake-like 10-kilometer, hopefully it works, yeah, a snake-like 10-kilometer robot that actually can go inside very tough terrain when there's a forest fire and spread the water there, so to stop the forest fires. And then the last one is not nature-inspired, but actually using the mapping where the pollutants in nature is. That's on the picture on the left at the city of Calgary, where I live, and then finding out what is the relationship between that and children who end up in the hospital because they cannot breathe because of asthma. And you can see there's a lot of children ending up with asthma. All of these solutions are fantastic, very elegant solutions, but sometimes it seems that us as engineers are sitting in our labs and in our offices and trying to find the most elegant way of blowing up a flame of a candle, where outside the whole world is burning. So what should we do? We should actually have our engineering be also bring out policy-driven solution. So I'm going to talk quickly about the transportation solution, some of the transportation solutions we have come up with. And here I'm considering all the active modes, running, walking, biking, to private cars, to buses and trains, to airplanes. And if, as engineers, we can easily calculate the energy burn for each mode of transportation. And if we look at these numbers a little bit better, we can see that average car uses twice as much energy per kilometer than a hybrid car, and a hybrid car uses two times more energy per kilometer than the electric car. And a train uses 18 times more. So if we take this number to the policymakers, what they would say to us is, well, best thing to do is to take out all of the cars and replace them with the electric cars, because now we are reducing our energy need by 4 times. And that's what Canada has done. This is a picture from the 440 megatons. It's a project that shows all the legislations in Canada. So the legislated, the developing ones, and the ones that have been announced are actually putting Canada in the path to net zero in terms of passenger transport. But unfortunately, this picture is not correct because it doesn't show us the whole values. It only shows us the values some people want us to see. So if we look at the lifetime emissions of different vehicles, I have shown 4 different types of vehicles here. Of course, Tesla, if you are having clean energy, will have the lowest amount of emissions than everything. However, if your energy mix is different, you're going to natural gas and then to coal, your energy usage or the CO2 emissions for the Tesla becomes a lot more. So now your Tesla is actually putting in lifetime emissions more than a mid-sized car. So the solution was not this. And where are we in Canada? In the place I live in 2021, the electricity mix was 90% of it was coal and natural gas. So right now, fortunately, with the advocacy from several groups, including Canadian Association for Physicians for Environment, CAPE, we have actually are phasing out coal. But all that means is we are sort of here, and we're going to go down a little bit, not really making a lot of movements here. So finally, I want to tell you a little bit about the finance solution. So this is a picture I showed you, and based on the picture, we made policies, and based on those policies, we actually had financing. So the financing for electric vehicles has been $515 billion. So that is over 1,000 times more than the loss and damage fund that was announced. So, but if you actually look at the CO2 emissions per person per kilometer using electricity mix, This is where all of our financing should have gone for transportation. So electric buses and electric trains. And so that $15 billion could actually have gone to make better solutions for us. Just really quickly, for the design, the nature provides us many inspirations, but also provides many problems to solve. We need to actually have policies that are based on sound science and all of the science, and goes to the root causes of the problem, which is the CO2 emissions. And the financing, we should put our money where it counts. And finally, we are all of us in this together. Whatever we do, we will all sort of see the results, but some people who we don't hear from them a lot will see the most impact. And so, under the smoke and in front of the roaring waves of the bushfire, I thought of the smaller lives that were caught. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laleh. I mean, she managed to go through a lot in 7 minutes, so congratulations for that. And I think she brought a great example of how engineering can provide information with evidence to policymakers. And maybe we talk a little bit later about the financial aspects. And the last but not the least speaker in this panel is Braun. Sue is the Executive Group Director on Sustainability at Worley, Engineering Leadership Group. Sue.
Thank you, David. Look, today I'm delighted to be talking to you about engineering with nature, and I'm really honoured today to be representing the Engineering Leadership Group, or ELG. The ELG was formed as a joint initiative of Resilience First and the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure to help deliver sustainable and resilient infrastructure on a global scale that addresses the world's most pressing environmental, social and economic needs. So the ELG brings together leading global engineering firms to really amplify the voice of engineers and engage with international and national policymakers to incorporate responsible and pragmatic engineering principles into their decisions. We're proud to be a member of the ELG. I need to move along with the other companies that you can see represented on this slide. If there are any engineers in this room working for other big engineering firms that aren't represented, your logo on this slide, then please come and talk to me afterwards. The current membership represents about 250,000 professional engineers and project delivery experts delivering the very projects that are going to deliver the energy transition. So, next slide. It's becoming increasingly evident that to address climate change, we need to prioritise and simultaneously prioritise the preservation and protection of our natural world. I'm sure that many of the people in this room will have seen the recent report from the Stockholm Resilience Centre highlighting that Earth is now beyond 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries that the Stockholm Resilience Centre defines. And the IPCC's 6th assessment report tabled the need for us to work with nature in our climate solutions. So nature and climate are not separate issues, they're inextricably linked and they need to be solved together. So what can we do at a practical level to create the change that we need? How do we integrate nature into engineering practices? We've heard some great examples already, and there are, coastal examples particularly seem to be the ones that get talked about. The utilisation of oyster banks, reefs and mangroves in preventing sea level erosion and whilst also nurturing ecosystems. The protection of habitats to reduce runoff and mitigate flood risk is another tangible example. But we also have much to learn from our First Nations people, and I come from Australia, which some of you might have picked from my accent, but also First Nations from all around the world. And what we know is that these groups have historically maintained really profound connections with nature and have a really deep, innate understanding of natural systems that is quite different, in fact, from the Western scientific understanding of those ecosystems. So their knowledge offers a holistic approach that we can learn from and integrate into our strategies. So in Canada, for example, I speak for Worley, we've developed 3 Indigenous business partnerships where we work alongside Indigenous communities and blend that Western and First Nations traditional thinking and understanding of environmental systems and environmental stewardship. So some examples of this approach include applying that traditional knowledge in land remediation and habitat creation in the restoration of land and water and biodiversity in northern Alberta, and also the development of so-called compensation lakes. And these are lakes that have been designed and created as habitat compensation from past development. The intent is that the lakes enhance local biodiversity and are stocked with native fish species. Worley's also working with a mining company to deliver Indigenous-led environmental impact assessments that are based around traditional knowledge, environmental stewardship and restoration that aligns with community needs, including cultural practices, harvesting and trapping. These approaches lead to more carboniferous soils and more resilient ecosystems. Another example is in the Arctic, where Worley's designing small craft harbours in ports in conjunction with the Inuit community to understand natural conditions and design with habitat creation and ecological restoration in mind. So, for example, the creation of fish spawning areas within the design of this port infrastructure. So it's time for us as engineers, innovators, policymakers and global citizens to harness the power of nature-inclusive solutions and innovative technology to advocate for solutions that will build a more sustainable future. I've got a specific sort of case study here to talk about, which is the Iona Island Restoration Project in collaboration with Metro Vancouver in Canada. And this project's a significant upgrade of a wastewater treatment plant founded on the need to work within a changing natural environment and to ensure sustainable infrastructure for the future. The project team is taking advantage of the necessary technological upgrades around treatment and the opportunity to enhance the natural environment of around the facility. So a large focus of the long-term program is to ensure that nature is incorporated into the design. This includes the breaching of causeways to allow water flow and connection between the river and the sea, and a focus on the protection and enhancement of key habitats for fish and wildlife. Another essential part of the project is working with the local communities to ensure that all stakeholder views are incorporated and that traditional knowledge is valued, as well as creating spaces for community to use and enjoy in the future. So Indigenous traditional knowledge was used, for example, in the preparation of the Habitat Creation Manual and to enhance biodiversity into the design. So the designs incorporate a long-term focus on biodiversity enhancement and hydrodynamic modelling to factor in changing conditions and designing for the future. So this is one sort of leading example of forging a harmonious relationship between human innovation and nature, setting a benchmark that benefits the environment and honours Indigenous heritage. The project still has some time to run, but we're already using these learnings with other customers of ours whose footprint includes estuaries and foreshore environments. And I'm sure the project team will be sharing their learnings more broadly. With that, I hand back to you, David.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you to all the speakers to be well on time in their interventions, because that gives us the opportunity to have a good Q&A session. So the floor now is yours. If you can just raise your hand, say who you are, who do you represent as an organization. A microphone is going to appear magically. So, any question from you regarding system thinking, engineering? Yes. There's one right at the bottom.
Thank you all for the very nice presentations. I'm Marielos Peñaclaros, representing the science panel for the Amazon. You all presented cases in which infrastructure has been used to restore systems that were already damaged one way or the other. And I'm wondering if you are also working on how infrastructure should be implemented to avoid the destruction, you see? Because you're using it to restore, but I'm wondering what can we do to avoid that infrastructure has a negative effect, and how can you deal with that?
I think Michaela.
Thank you. So I think I mentioned the no-build solutions just now, and I want to dig into that a bit more. Obviously, I think what you're saying is a really important point, and we don't say it enough, that actually when you restore ecosystems, the value is just not as good as if you'd preserved it and conserved it at the beginning. And so PAS 2080 really works on the carbon reduction hierarchy. The first step is to avoid any damage in the first place before you move on to how can I fix it. And I think we need to start taking that approach more holistically across, not just in terms of carbon, but also biodiversity and other impacts.
And so I'm a professor, so most of the things I do is teaching, but when we're teaching engineering design, maybe we would have taught beforehand on how to, maybe at the end of the life cycle, how you can reuse some parts of it. But now we are teaching things like regenerative design, so that follow the cycle of the nature. So when you design something from the beginning, before you start designing it, think about the whole cycle of how that can go back in a loop. And also things like circular economy, what is the impact on the environment, but also what's the impact on the equity and the social measures. So, for example, if you're making a transportation system, this is one of the things I did not talk about in my work, is that most of the cars are used by men. Men use 70% of the cars, and women are own 30% of the cars. And that's in North America, which is women actually own a lot more. But then we just need to actually figure out what type of transportation systems will be better to be used, and for all of those, and how does that make it equitable? So start from both the social angle and also from the planetary boundary angle, and then try to make it a circular.
The idea the idea that I was discussing was this idea of thinking about nature as infrastructure, and I think communities around the world have been doing that for centuries. And there's examples. I know after Super Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines, there was an analysis that was done afterwards that very clearly demonstrated that the communities with healthy mangrove systems were significantly less impacted than the communities that had lost their mangrove systems. And so, motivated by that, you're seeing governments starting to actually look at these ecosystems from that perspective and conserve them from a policy point of view. So I think you're right that that's not done at the level that it needs to be, but there is a transition starting to happen.
I think there are some other developments happening as well in relation to the introduction of the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, whereby I think companies are going to be held to account a lot more in relation to adverse impacts that they have on ecosystems actually. So I think we're going to really see the ante be upped in that regard.
Yeah, and maybe just to add my thinking as well, I think you raised a very important point. I like one of the points from Laleh about the finance, put the money where it counts. And I wish it is that, because usually it's put the money where there is a return, there's a business case. Sometimes, business cases, they can be made more compelling by restoration rather than avoidance. If it makes sense, there's an emotional aspect as well, there's a political aspect, so there's more finance available. So I think that, given the context of the system thinking, I'm pretty sure we can improve our business cases by approaching the system thinking in business cases as well. Right. Good discussion. There we go. Another very good question. I can see that coming. Is that?
Thank you for today's panel session. My name is Ishraq. I work at a company based here in Dubai. We're basically launching this mangrove restoration project. It's the largest in Africa after Delta Carbon, the one that was in Pakistan. And I think we want to also kind of see the integration of private sector towards the research and how that can be a great potential, because when I walked in, I was listening to the green-gray solutions that was presented by Conservation International. And I think that's where we see a potential for how these usually lab-based or research-based kind of conversations can move towards the private sector, because that's where you start to mobilize and actually integrate this thing where it helps impact different people. And this is where you also get closer to communities, in the sense that if we have something new, would you be open to using it? Because I think it's one thing to research and create it, and it's another to know if this is applicable or accepted actually by a lot of people, because sometimes there's a moral question around, you know, using concrete in our seabeds and how that will impact communities. Although in the end it can protect them and increase that climate resilience that we are in dire need of in this moment in time. But yeah, I think this is more of a suggestion, but also a question on what's the trajectory towards that private sector inclusion.
So I'm going to do a little advert for the second panel. We have a wonderful speaker from Guyana who is going to be talking about an example where we're partnering with an engineering company to do exactly that. But also the Green Grey Community of Practice is really there to bring together a wide range of partners who are interested in this, so governments, communities, and quite a few engineering companies, to really address those issues of how we bring all those very relevant stakeholders together to normalise and mainstream these solutions across all of those communities.
I can't wait to have that kind of collaboration. Thank you.
Anything else? Otherwise, this is yet another example of system thinking. We need to blur the boundaries between academia, research, and private engineering and other aspects of knowledge, and the public as well, to deliver better results. Looking around for more questions. There's one there, a little bit on the shy side.
Hello. Okay, this is a little loud, sorry. Hi, my name is Yusuf. I'm from Egypt. I'm a climate and sustainable development engineer. I'm here as a delegate of the Youth Climate Collaborative. And my question is, so when you're approaching projects, engineering projects from a systems thinking perspective, sometimes what happens is you're exposed to some blind spots or impacts that you wouldn't have otherwise been aware of. So my question here becomes, how do you prioritize the different impacts that would come up when they're conflicting with each other? You might have heard the term of the wicked problem. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So that's my question. How do you address those? Thank you.
That's a very good question. How do we make system thinking practical and pragmatic? I'm looking at them.
I can just take a... So I really like the description of a wicked problem. I don't know how many people here know what's a wicked problem. Everybody? Okay. Yeah, so it is really hard to solve a wicked problem because we don't even know what's the solution, or there's no path. And at the end of it, all the people who are trying to solve it pay the price for solving it. So I think what you need to do is to increase the diversity of the, not only engineering workforce, but the people engineers work with, and the skills of engineers. And that's why inclusion and diversity are really, really important to be able to solve these problems. Because as engineers, we tend to see things really like, you know, as if they're like an algorithm to be solved, and I'll go take these steps, and then at the end of it, I have a flow chart that solves this. But never it is like that. And so if you have different voices in the room, you can bring those perspectives. And those perspectives only will be allowed to be in if the spaces you are making are inclusive. So everybody is able to bring in their point of view and what is going to be happening. So I think that is more of a question of how to change the culture and how to sort of not think that engineers have all the solutions. That's another part of it. And then try to figure out what are the perspectives we are missing to be able to solve these hard problems.
Yeah, and if I can maybe build on that, I think there's also something at that very early stage of project development around the way that different options are assessed, that there's a very multifactored approach taken that's not just about, you know, the dollars, for example, or the, you know, the throughput that gets enabled by a particular option, but that the issues of environmental impact and social impact are factored into decision making actually as to what become the go forward options.
I think, again, great question. And I remember when I finished university 25 years ago, I knew everything. But then life told me something else. And now, working in sustainability and using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as the ultimate framework for system thinking, you see how difficult it is to really pass this message about, how to tackle complexity. But I think Laleh provided a fantastic example about increasing this diversity and relaxing a little bit. That this is a journey we are all walking, so we can take all the risk management, all the traditional stuff. We don't throw away the baby in the bathwater, but we need to start from a different assumption, because that is going to take us, and a different team, that is going to take us to a different destination. We have time for yes.
Hi, I'm Lad Cannell with Bank Information Center in DC. I think you would agree that these solutions, these nature-based solutions, work better and cost less, and yet they are not happening. I mean, or if you disagree, I'd be interested in hearing that. But if that is the case, what is the barrier to their adoption? Is it policy? Is it finance? Or is it some combination of those things?
So that I will give a little preview. That's the sort of, in some ways, the topic of our discussion for the panel that will come afterwards. But I think it's all of the above. I think we heard, I want to go back to our very first speaker. I think there's a culture change amongst the engineering community. And I mean, there's many structural issues. I think the sort of, often it's regulatory, often there's policy barriers to these ecosystems. There is been a number of conversations this week with the insurance industry about these ecosystems around risks and uncertainties. So we understand the risks associated with well-established, let's say, traditional grey infrastructure. The risks might actually be significantly less with green infrastructure, but they're unknown. And so often people prefer a greater risk that's known than an unknown risk that may be less. And so I think establishing and addressing some of these issues and integrating them both into the sort of engineering design phase, but then into all the other places where risk and uncertainty, whether it be financing, insurance, etc. I think also in many of the places that I work, which Lad knows where those are, but in the developing and the global south, there's just not the capacity or the expertise to really confidently implement them. So that needs to be addressed. I don't know, Sue, if she...
Can I? Yeah, I think it's just the money at the beginning, just to start. So at the beginning of November, BlackRock announced $500 million for carbon capture, okay? Now, we do have a nature-based solution for carbon capture, which is basically planting trees. But there's no $500 billion announced for planting trees. And also, we had, in Canada, we had enough trees burned this last summer to basically burn the whole country of Belgium and some other countries beside it. So it is just, we're not putting our money and our policies in the places that would actually give us those solutions that are much better.
Yeah, there's something about, oh sorry, Michaela. There's something, I thought, Emily, you put it very eloquently, but there's something about the culture of engineering and business actually to prefer something that's certain, right? So an over-designed certain solution versus a cheaper, perhaps more effective, but with some uncertainty and a bit more complex to execute solution. The over-designed, more expensive one will probably win it, 9 times out of 10. And that's cultural, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that all the speakers are saying, but I kind of want to turn the action back on all of you, because I think it's easy for us to sit up here and tell you the facts and like what standards are out there, like examples of projects. But if it ends at you sitting here listening to us and not taking those lessons back to the people you work with and the communities you work with, there's kind of no point of all of us being here, because I think all of us in this room understand the importance of acting for climate, but it's the people who aren't at COP that we need to bring on board. So yeah.
There we go. So this is the second task that Michela is giving us today. Thank you for the question. Apologies for your question. I don't want to do it in the next session, so maybe if you can hold it and you can ask it later. I just wanted to thank the speakers for your interventions and your participations and your participation as well. Stay there. We are just going to swap panelists and more discussion about engineering and nature-based solutions.